Hi, I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, host of Highly Sensitive Money. I'm a money coach, certified financial planner, and a highly sensitive person who brings money and social justice together. If you're someone who feels deeply, can endlessly think through how one decision affects everything else, or has ever struggled with all the things that traditional financial thinking leaves out, you're in the right place. In this show, I chat with highly sensitive people on how they handle their money, and with money experts on how they cultivate social justice in their work. Questions? Please go to allthecolors.net and schedule a free 30-minute call. And I'm happy to share resources on investment management, money coaching, workshops, or anything else money and social justice related. Join us in this episode as we explore money and sensitivity while honoring that all of our well-being is interconnected. In this episode, I'm joined by Mónica Duarte, a trauma-informed coach and first-generation Latina who helps women and cycle breakers heal from the inside out so they can pursue their goals with clarity and confidence. We talk about what it really means to be a cycle breaker, how unprocessed trauma can make even our biggest dreams feel unsafe, and why having money can feel like holding a hot potato when you've grown up in survival mode. Mónica shares deeply personal stories, from her immigrant childhood and near-death experiences to her spiritual awakening, and how she now guides clients through Dick Schwartz's internal family systems to access their own inner wisdom. This conversation is about reclaiming safety, power, and purpose, not by pushing harder, but by turning inward. It's honest, gentle, and full of insights for anyone navigating healing and ambition at the same time. Welcome, everyone, to Highly Sensitive Money. I am very excited to share the stage today with another Latina coach. I think there's like 3 of us, so I'm really excited to have you here. Mónica Duarte is a mental well-being coach and has several specializations. So, Mónica, if you could introduce your work and who you love working with, that'll be really helpful for the audience.
Beautiful. So my name is Mónica Duarte, and I'm a mental well-being and credentialed professional goal coach. And I help women, Latinas, and entrepreneurs who are cycle breakers to process trauma and reach their goals from the inside out. And the work that I do is focused on helping them to discover their true self so they can live their life with purpose.
I love that phrase, cycle breaker. How would you describe that? How would someone identify themselves as a cycle breaker?
Yeah, so for me, a cycle breaker on a deeper level is somebody who is breaking generational cycles. So it can be in your, obviously in your family. It could be also like in work environments as well. So we're basically breaking dysfunctional cycles and creating something new that's more healthy. So that's my definition of what that means.
And I know some of your backstory of how you came to this work. But again, the origin story of like what led you down this path is always a very big learning place for anyone listening.
Okay, yeah. So I'm originally from Mexico. My parents brought me to the US when I was 5 years old. So I'm very familiar with the immigrant experience and how traumatizing that is. I was born and raised around a bunch of trauma. And as a kid, I was really sensitive energetically and on many different levels. And I always questioned, like, why is life this way? Why is society this way? Why is my family this way? And I wanted something better. I also am the first in my family to go to and graduate from college. So that experience is also traumatizing, even though it's like, yay, it's also traumatizing to navigate that experience. I studied advertising, and after I graduated, I worked as a graphic designer for an engineering firm in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And then after a few years of doing that, I went through a near-death experience. And it was after that near-death experience that I realized that although I had reached the American dream, I didn't really know who I was, and I felt empty on the inside, and I wasn't okay with that. So I decided to give up my corporate job, and it really made my parents really upset because it's like, you worked so hard for this, But at that time in my life, spirituality became really, really important. So I decided to leave my corporate job and I moved to Sedona, Arizona. Sedona, Arizona is known as one of the spiritual meccas here in the US. So I wanted to be in an environment that was supportive of where I was at that time in my life. And when I was there, I was exposed to a lot of healing and spiritual modalities. I dabbled into many different things. And then I went through a second near-death experience. And it was after that that I learned that although those healing modalities or spiritual modalities were helping me to feel better for a period of time, it was not long lasting. And that's when I started to learn more about trauma. And I started to work with a therapist who specializes in internal family systems, also known as parts work. And that is the modality that helped me to process a bunch of trauma. And I felt the impacts. And because it helped me so much, I decided to get trained in it. So I did a 1-year program. And at that same time that I was going through that program, I was also around other coaches that were credentialed as professional goal coaches. So that's where that kind of came in, and I decided to get trained in that. So one of the things that my work is really focused around is that you can have these amazing goals, but if you have trauma that you have not processed, it makes it really challenging to reach those goals, because for your internal world, those goals may feel unsafe. So I work with a lot of clients that come to me with these goals, and then because I'm trained to work with trauma, I'm able to notice the trauma responses when they're happening. And so we kind of talk about that more. And what I do is I help them process that trauma. So that way, that trauma or the inner distortion that the trauma creates, it's not there anymore. For example, with imposter syndrome, right? Processing that imposter syndrome so that they can basically regain their confidence, their self-esteem, and it makes it easier to move forward towards those goals. So that's a big focus of my work, both the trauma work, but also the goal coaching. And I do incorporate parts work also into my goal coaching. So I do both. Yeah.
That's a lot of different modalities, and it sounds like just your own need, your own curiosity is what led you down the different paths. There was something that you said, that the goals may feel unsafe. When I'm working with clients who are coming out of debt or have now a higher income job than they've ever had before, sometimes I tease my clients that I don't tease them, but I will ask them, what does it feel like to have cash? Because having cash, right, the so-called cash cushion, emergency savings, can feel unsafe for them. I actually remember having a client who said that it felt like having a whole hot potato.
Wow.
She just wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible. For someone who's in that situation where they're both wanting to feel safety, intellectually, maybe they understand that it's good for them to hold cash. And at the same time, some of my clients want to invest it, others want to spend it, others want to give it away. What kind of recommendations would you give them? How would you help them start to understand what was motivating them or creating hardship?
Yeah, so great question. So I would work with them to understand what parts of them are feeling hesitant to have money, right? And then with the work that we do, the work that I do, I basically go to the core of where that started. So we work with these parts within them, and these parts will let us know, this is the first time that I had an experience where money felt unsafe to have, right? And then we start to process that trauma. And by processing and then unburdening from that trauma, then there's more space for them to feel safe to have money, or to bring money into their lives. But until that's not processed, even if they try to, take all these amazing classes and learn, that's still going to feel unsafe. So that's why I'm a really strong advocate of going, doing that inner work, especially with Latinas. We're not really comfortable. A lot of us are not comfortable working, even looking at our trauma. It feels scary because it's not normalized in our community. But if we don't do that work, we are missing out on so much, and we're missing out on really living our full potential. So then that, you kind of have to ask yourself, what are you losing if you don't do that work, right?
Right. It can feel scary to take a step into this work. And at the same time, like you said, what are you losing if you just don't step into it? You also just brought up the fact that Latinas are often not comfortable looking at our trauma. I mean, my personal experience has been different. My mom was all about therapy and all about self-help books when I was a kid. And I kind of grew up following her into that realm. But I think she's the only one. I'm thinking of all of the women in my family. Maybe there's one that one time opened up a book, but Yeah, so tell us more about your experience with that, and what does it take for a Latina to actually feel ready to work with you or to start to look at the healing that's needed?
It's been really fascinating because when I started working as a coach around trauma, I would go to these like pretty big Latino events where there's like these professional events or professional people. And as soon as that I would introduce myself, like, oh, I help Latinas process trauma, it's like shut down. It's like, oh, we don't talk about that here. So it's just normalized. I think part of that is the impacts of colonization, to be quite honest, because many of us have been in survival mode for many generations. And one of the ways that we have it's not really overcome, but that we've navigated that is by not looking at the past. So that is a trauma response that if we not looking at our past and healing that is a trauma response. It's a way that we were able to navigate our lives because it wasn't safe back then to do that. But now for a lot of us, especially here in the US, like the next journey in our path is to look at our trauma, because without doing that work, we're really limiting ourselves. We're not going to be able to live our full potential. The imposter syndrome is a very popular thing in Latinos, or it's a very common thing. And like, I've done workshops for many organizations, and a lot of times Latinos were like, just tell me how to fix this. Like, give me the tools. And it's like, the tool is to literally do the work and process the trauma. I'm not going to give you like, do 10 jumping jacks or because that's not solving it. You're just building more coping mechanisms, right? So yes, I do feel that resistance even when I have clients that really see the value of the work that I do. But then when they realize like, oh, we really have to go deep. And I mean, the process that I do is very gentle, but you're still going deep, right? But when they start to kind of feel like, dang, I'm going to have to look at the truth, that scares them, because you are going to have to look at the truth. You're going to have to look at yourself objectively, your situations objectively from a place of truth, and not what we think, the distortions basically. And that can be scary. So usually the clients that are ready to work with me is because they're really tired of this pattern. They notice this pattern and they're like, I don't know what to do. I've tried everything else. I've gone to therapy. I've worked with coaches. I'm ready. And even then there's still that fear. And even before we start to do more of the deeper work, we work with the parts of them that have that resistance or that fear so that it feels safe for them to go deeper.
There was something you said about a lot of us as immigrants just being in a place of survival. I remember having a conversation with someone else who was on this podcast, Douglas Soy, in the last season, and he is a child of Chinese immigrants. And he kind of said, because we were talking about high sensitivity, which is where I want us to steer off into next. But Douglas said that his parents didn't have like the idea or the space, that it wasn't available or valued to kind of do that more inner excavation work. And it was interesting to hear like his experience of being an immigrant and just being like, well, is it really that important? If they didn't do it and they were able to move past it. And I remember sharing, which is something I'll echo right here, that like as a sensitive person, I can't help but do it. It's kind of like the princess and the pea syndrome, that if there's something in me that bothers me, I can't move forward until I've dealt with it. And that can both be it can be a curse, because like I see so many other people who are able to move through life with some good old denial, and like they seem to be doing okay. And here I am like really staring at this tiny little pea and yet I think I also hear this in your experience and what you're sharing about the work that you do with clients. Once we actually do the work of seeing what's there and making changes, like an entire new life is possible.
Yeah, definitely. Even in my own experience, like when I started doing this work with my therapist, it was in 2020. I was a very different person back then. I had left an abusive relationship, like probably like a year before that. I was really depressed. I was mentally not doing well, and emotionally, and on so many levels. And now I look back and I'm like, dang, I'm so different. Like I was really afraid of asserting myself, setting boundaries. There were so many skills that I didn't have. And because I did this work, I was able to develop those skills. Like now, even with my own family, I'm comfortable setting boundaries. Like just telling them like, hey, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not something that's normal in a lot of Mexican households. And dating, I'm very like, I advocate for my needs a lot now. And I also, if something bothers me, I let them know. That's not something that I could do a few years ago, you know? So definitely like, I've seen this in my clients too, where they, even in the beginning, they're really sensitive. Like the trauma that they've experienced is so immense that everything triggers them, right? And so they show up in sessions crying and everything. They cry about over everything. And there's nothing wrong with that. They don't know how to make sense of their emotions, their thoughts, none of that. And then, you know, within several months, they're more secure in themselves. They're more grounded. They're more regulated. They're advocating for themselves. Like it's completely different. So yes. And, you know, for me being somebody who I do consider myself very sensitive in the sense that like as a child, I could see the truth of situations. I could see the dysfunction in the family. I could see the dysfunction in our culture and I couldn't ignore it. And it made me feel really sensitive to be around people that either didn't see it or didn't want to see it. And to navigate spaces like that was traumatizing as a sensitive child. Traumatizing also in the sense of being in a home where everybody was really harsh and I wasn't. That was not my natural tendency. So it's, you know, a lot of the clients that I get are kind of fall into that same experience where they also were very sensitive and they grew up in homes that were really abusive and didn't provide any space for them to develop themselves or that helped them to see their gifts, right? So yes, I highly agree with that.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to start to bring the focus to money. If you can share the background of your childhood, and again, to the extent that you're comfortable, like maybe what was the background of your childhood and how do you see that continue to impact the work you do today?
Yeah. So, you know, I've started to do my own work around processing trauma around money for the past few months. And I can confidently say this, that I am comfortable having this conversation now. If it were a few months ago, probably I would be crying, you know, talking about these experiences. But my experience with money, I was raised in poverty. And that was really difficult seeing my mom like trying to even find food for us, right? I was also raised around domestic violence. My dad would be, half of the year he would be in Mexico and half of the year he would be here in the US. But one of the things that I gain clarity through doing the work that I do is that part of the poverty was created within my own family, mainly my dad, where he would withhold money instead of the money he would supposedly make here in the US and give it to us so that that was the whole point, right? To get out of poverty, he would not do that. He would withhold it and then we would still stay poor. And then coming to the US, having to give up whatever little we had to coming to the US to have nothing, right? I think one of the things too was also being aware that we were poor. The shame that comes with that. It's like, oh, we have less than other people, but then being told also, well, you should be grateful for what you have, which is not hardly anything, right? So, so there's this shame that's created that I shouldn't want to have more than this because other people have it worse than me. So that's been like fascinating. And as I've been doing the work of processing my trauma in regards to money, being able to gain clarity of where this is coming from. And part of it was my dad. Part of it was the economic environment I was in. And part of it also was my own value. Because growing up around domestic violence, I also learned that I didn't have value as a girl, as a woman now, right? And as I've been working through that trauma as well, like in recognizing my own value that I inherently have, I'm noticing that it's opening up my internal capacity to allow more money in and to feel safe with allowing more of that money in. So that's from my perspective. As far as my clients, I mean, a lot of the clients I worked with have had experiences where they also were raised in poverty. And some of the trauma responses that I've seen is where they either spend a lot they spend a lot of money because they're compensating for the poverty that they lived in, or they withhold a lot because they're afraid of like, oh, one day we're going to lose everything.
There's a book called Scarcity, and I think I mention it like every third interview. The subtitle is Why Having Too Little Means So Much. And research shows that that's often how people respond when it's not consistent, like either money or love, attention, food, anything that's not consistent, that's a basic survival need. People will often respond in two ways. Either they'll hoard it, right? They'll just like really hold it tight to themselves, or they use it as soon as it comes in. And that's not being in right relationship, because you're not even, again, it's one of the things about trauma is that it can get us stuck into patterns that maybe served us as kids but don't serve us as adults. And I mean, I'm not a therapist myself, but like having done my own trauma work and worked with clients as they're processing what they're going through, that shift of recognizing that a different type of life is possible, it takes so much work. It's so miraculous, and it's very like spirally. We kind of have to go back into that shift over and over again, right? If you have an experience of a money miracle, right? Something that happens well with money, sometimes people don't even have the eyes to see it because their story is so limiting around money that they're always in deprivation, or that the money's always taken away. I remember when we were preparing for this, you mentioned a money miracle that you went through, your student loan payoffs.
Yeah.
I would love to hear, like, what was that experience like for you? And also, how would you guide someone that was going through something like that was receiving a positive experience in order for them not to reject it?
Yeah. So there's a few things that came up as you were talking, and if it's okay, I'd like to share. One of them is that in regards to money, and I think we talked about this before, that money is just a tool. And what happens is that we project a lot of things onto money. Money is not good or bad. It's just a resource, right? But for those of us who've experienced trauma with money, we project all of those insecurities onto money. And we think, oh, money's bad, money's this. But once you start to process the trauma that money's connected to for you, you start to create space so that you can see like, oh, money is just a tool and a resource, and I've been projecting all this stuff on it. Oh my God. Like, and now I'm healing and I don't feel that way about it, right? A lot of times I think we talking about this, but we project our own worth onto money. And that's so disempowering because our inherent worth has nothing to do with money. Money's just a tool, right? So some of the exercises that I do, that I'm remembering now that I do with my clients, is I help them connect to, because we do have parts within us that are very wise in regards to money. And I help them to connect with those parts of them so that they can start to develop a healthier relationship with money. So that's one thing that came up. The other thing is, to answer your question, as I've been going through my journey, I check in with my internal world. I check in with my parts all the time. That is a daily practice I have every day. And as I've been going through this journey, that's what I do. So one of the things that I was trying with my parts is like feeling comfortable with making more money. So like I would think of a number, like a really big number, and then feel it in my body and check in with my parts and like, how does this number feel if we could make this every year? Or like, oh, that's too much. Okay, let's make it less. What about this number? That feels good. It's more, but it's like, it feels good. And so I would just sit in like this energy of receiving that money. And what ended up happening in addition to processing that trauma is that my student loans were forgiven. I got an email one day and they told me that they were forgiving them for whatever reason in regards to my school. And I'm just like, dang, is this real? Like, what the heck? Like, because it wasn't like a small number, right? So that was really huge. And I'm like, wow. The other aspect is I'm doing work with you, like I'm working with you. And there was something that you said in our last session that really stuck. And I think the reason it stuck is because I've been doing this work already on my own with my parts. And one of my traumas has been that money has been used to harm. And so for me, receiving more money felt unsafe because like that's the narrative that I had internally, right? Like I don't feel safe because people use money to take advantage, or people are just going to want to take my money away because that's how I grew up. And you said something that like, well, what if money could be used for good. Like you question that, like what if money could be used for good? And then you asked me, like, can you think of a time where money was used for good? And we started to bring up scenarios, and I'm like, oh my God, duh, like I didn't even see that before. So having that reference that money is also used for good, but maybe I didn't grow up around it, but it's still happening and I'm not seeing it, that really helped my parts to be like, dang, like we need to pay attention to more of that stuff. So what's been happening for me since that last session is that I've been checking in with my parts. And because I know for a fact that I'm inherently good, I've been telling my parts and working with my parts to be like, you know, money is safe to receive because we're good, and money is also channeled to goodness, right? So it's like it's been very empowering. I'm still like really taking that in because I'm like, dang, that was really powerful, even that narrative, right? So
yeah, thank you. Thank you for feeling comfortable sharing that we're working together. And there is something about just like when we receive, I can share a personal experience of like, I received a stipend from my work last year, and my first internal reaction was like, I don't deserve this. Like, I shouldn't be getting this. Like, I don't know. I didn't know that I was going to get it. It was an amount that I had never imagined. And I just had to sit with that like initial rejection of it. I mean, I didn't say no. Like, at least I knew enough not to be like, no money, no. But it was surprising. And it became an invitation to look at other limiting beliefs around it, right? So when you shared this example of the student loans being forgiven, and I love that you were sharing that you were imagining, like, what would it feel like to have more abundance? And then this beautiful miracle, coincidence, gift happens. That happened for many people, but not for everyone. I love just the idea that you enjoyed it. You let it in. You let it in and you said, this can be part of my experience.
yeah, I mean, I definitely let it in, but it took a little bit because when I got that email, I'm like, what is this for reals? And then like, I looked at it several times a day. I'm like, oh my God, this is really happening, you know? And it took several weeks for me, like, wow, this is amazing. Thank you, God, you know? But then also, I also felt self-conscious because I did not feel comfortable telling my family that this happened, because there's a specific narrative with my family in regards to money that I don't feel comfortable talking to them about money. It doesn't feel safe to me. So I felt kind of bummed out that I wasn't able to celebrate that with them. And honestly, you were one of the first persons that I shared that with. So that was like, whoa.
Wow, I'm really honored. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was something that you mentioned earlier about growing up in an experience where you didn't have much, right? You immigrated to the US and you didn't have much before. You had even less when you got here. And then being told, but be grateful for what you do have. And there's a level of gaslighting there, right? Where we're not fully, and you know, it's like we grow up, and at least my belief is that our parents just do the best that they could with what they have. And the culture that we have is like living in capitalism. It's so extractive, living in climate collapse. Like there's a lot of very stressful things. And as a sensitive child, I know that when I saw that, like you mentioned it earlier, you could see the truth, right? So those of us as children that could see the truth that maybe our parents didn't want to see, or that our parents were just trying to protect us from, but that we saw anyway. That experience of gaslighting means that later on, we just trust. It can feel difficult to trust our own experiences of the world. When you're working with clients and you see maybe this experience of gaslighting, how do you guide them through that with parts work, with goal setting? What are some of the tools that you use there?
That's a good question. So when I work with my clients to help them kind of process any gaslighting, you know, with parts work, I don't necessarily tell my clients their experience. Their internal world will. So for example, I guide my clients in going deeper and accessing that wisdom. So for example, if there's a part, for example, a client who has a part who experienced extreme neglect, right? And then part of that was their parents like gaslighting them or whatever, I will ask my client to ask that part, like, how did that impact them? And then the part will share with the client, like, this is how it impacted me. And then sometimes I will facilitate where, when it's needed, to help my clients understand. So what your parent did, your parent acted this way because of their own traumas, or they acted this way because for whatever reason, and it had nothing to do with you. And then I will ask, like, check in with your part and see, how does your part feel about that as I'm sharing that? And then that part will be like, wow, like, I never realized that. I thought it was all me. And, and that's part of the healing process, is the validating, to be quite honest. So if anything, is being able to guide my clients sometimes to ask the right questions to their part so that they can get the answers. But a huge part is validating the experience of my clients, whatever they went through. Because a lot of times they have not ever experienced that. They have never experienced validating how they felt, that experience impacted them. And that allows them to kind of create space so that they're not taking on, the gaslighting, and they're like, can start to really see themselves in their situation and the impacts of it more objectively. And the other thing too is that I have clients who, even though they have, experienced abuse in their home, they still love those people. And so the big thing that I say is, you can still love somebody and know that they hurt you, and still be upset over that and want to heal that. The multiple things can be true at the same time. It's not white or black.
That's so true. And I wrote down this phrase that you said: their internal world tells them their experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's a beautiful gift that you're giving people, and sitting with them as they kind of create that safety to go and explore their internal world.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I love doing this work. Is when I was part of the spiritual community, I was always going to somebody to give me answers about me, whether it was like a spiritual coach or like a reader or whatever. They were the ones that always knew what was right for me. And I started to get upset. I'm like, why can't I figure those things out for myself? Like, why do I have to go to somebody to tell me what I need to do and what's right for me, right? And I honestly feel like God put this work in my life because I was frustrated with that. And with this work, like, again, I don't tell my clients what their experience are. My main purpose is to be a guide to help them navigate their internal world and help them to make sense of what's happening inside, and to keep the container safe for them to do that work. And their internal world will tell them everything that they need to know. I just help them make sense of it. And that's so empowering. And the intention of this work is not for my clients to be dependent of me. It's for them to build the skills so that they can continue to do that on their own. So it's very empowering.
I see something similar when it comes to money coaching, that I may be an expert on money. I mean, I'm a certified financial planner. I've got all these years of experience. I've seen all these people's money, but I'm not an expert on my client's life. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, and often, like when I'm having a prospect conversation, somebody who is considering working with me, there's a money coach or an investment manager, I tell them, like, I have maybe like the first 10 steps that you should take, but those steps are meaningless if they actually don't make sense with your viewpoint of the world, or your family background, or your priorities, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's often, when it comes to the term, when the topic is money, there's often a lot of this idea that, like, I should know how to do this well.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But we all have such different cultures. For example, as someone who's also Mexican, like, my family's well-being has always been really important. And that idea of, like, I was talking with a friend last week, and that you can't like visit a family member and show up empty-handed. You have to bring them like at least food and flowers, but like it's even better if you bring them like actual clothing and maybe some furniture, like show up with real
practical things.
Yeah. And there's also like beauty to our culture. So I would love to hear like some of the things about being Latina that light you up, and maybe how they served you in your work as a well-being coach.
Yeah. So one of the aspects that I love about being Latina, my great-grandfather was indigenous, so he's Mexica, the Aztec people. And I have been working to embrace or reconnect back to that aspect or that culture respectfully, right? I love that about the fact that I have those roots within me, because when I started to do the work, I always felt like I didn't belong in my family. I didn't grow up in a home because of the trauma that I experienced. I didn't grow up in a typical home where like necessarily like I would have this community. Like I didn't grow up like that. So when people say, oh, Mexicans are really family oriented, that was not my experience. My experience was like, I was the one that was like the rebel or whatever. Like that's how my family saw me, misbehaving one, even though what I was doing was trying to show a new path that was healthier. To them, I was misbehaving. So when I started to do the deeper work, the ancestral work, to connect with those aspects of me, or my ancestors, my indigenous ancestors, for the first time in my life, I started to feel at home. Because the things that these gifts that I have of like being sensitive, sometimes I can pick up on things or see things, being creative, like dancing, like all of these things are things that were natural to my indigenous ancestors. And I'm like, oh my God, like it makes so much sense why I gravitate towards that. So for me, that's been an important aspect of my life, and something that I have started to incorporate in my work. When I do speaking engagements, and I do one around imposter syndrome, I do incorporate some of the wisdom that my indigenous ancestors have shared with me, because you can still connect with your indigenous ancestors even if they passed on. You can still access that wisdom. So that's kind of what I celebrate, is more of like the roots, like the foundation of our culture, right? Because even in Mexico is an indigenous country, even though we've experienced all of the things with colonization. At the root, it is an indigenous country. A lot of Mexicans are indigenous. Doesn't matter what percentage, we do have those roots. And that's what I celebrate, is those roots. And, I love music. I love the food, although I can't eat it because I have some stomach issues and I can't eat spicy food anymore. And I'm like, no. But what I love the most is the music and the culture, like the art. Those are my two favorite things, and the spirituality. Those are my things that I feel at home in that community.
Yeah, it's a similar experience. Like my family had its own things that it went through. And when I came to visit Mexico City the first time, about 4 years ago, is when I started traveling in Mexico on my own. When it wasn't just like visits to all my tias and tios and primos. That's when I started to see more about this culture and feel more excited about it. I had this one experience, and I'm excited for you to come to Mexico, see it. I've been in many metro places, like metro stations, like subway lines, New York, Paris, Tokyo. Like I got to travel in years before. I was a nomad before settling here in Mexico City. But it wasn't until I arrived at the Estación de Chabacano. There's a big giant metro station here in Mexico City, and all of the food that the vendors were selling is obviously Mexican. People were playing cumbia, like the music, the like vendors, what they were yelling out, and also the art. The art was so Mexican that I felt so proud. I don't know why, but I love metro stations. Maybe because I grew up in LA and there was no public transportation. That's why I love it. And I felt the sense of pride and ownership at being like, oh, this one's mine. This is my metro station. This is my subway. Like I love subways. And now here's one that's part of my culture. And in just so many ways, like actually having the gift of living now in this country, it's expanded my relationship with my Latinidad in a way that would not have happened had I stayed in the US.
And that's thank you for sharing. That's one of the reasons I'm feeling pulled to spend more time in Mexico City. When I went for the first time was in 2023. I had not been back in Mexico for 20 years. And I went back because that was part of me reconnecting to those indigenous roots. I wanted to be around where my indigenous ancestor was, where it was their home, right? And one of the challenges that I was dealing with at that time was this narrative. I mean, there's so much confusion in the Latino community about like, you're not indigenous if you're not part of the community, or you are, or you're not, blah, blah, blah. Like everybody has different opinions. And I was struggling with that. And also because I'm mixed, like my great grandmother was Spanish. So it's like, people, well, you're a colonizer. Like, no, I'm not. Like they came into their land and they colonized us. Like, when I went to Teotihuacan, that was one of the places that I intentionally wanted to go to. And at first I was like, oh, this is really pretty. I wasn't feeling anything really. But then I got on top of one of the small pyramids and I was just standing there and I felt this energy just kind of fly at me. And it was really gentle, but really powerful. And then internally, I heard, you can still celebrate your culture. And basically the essence of it is like, only because you have concerns or whatever, it doesn't mean you can't learn about your culture. And so in that moment, it was literally my ancestors saying, you can still learn about us. There's nothing wrong with that, even if you have all of these concerns or whatever. And so for me, that was like the green flag for me to be like, okay, I'm going to learn more about this because this is really feeling like my calling. When I left Mexico to come back to the US, I was depressed for like a month because I realized that although I'm grateful for a lot of, the opportunities that I've had here, I really missed out on feeling connected, being part of my culture in Mexico. Whether it was in Michoacan, which is where I'm from, or Mexico City, like I didn't grow up around feeling that connection, right? And so that's one of the reasons why now I'm like, okay, I need to go back more and connect back more and learn more about it and really embrace myself in that, because that's a big part of who I am as a being. Even if I didn't want to be part of it, my body is freaking Mexican. You know what I mean? Like you can't ignore that. My DNA is Mexican. So
yeah, I'll share another funny example of my own life. I remember when I was in LA, I did Lindy Hop, which is this kind of like style of dancing that like sometimes you see in the movies where people are, I don't know, during World War II and they're kind of like hopping around and they toss the person up into the air. So I was doing Lindy Hop and I remember somebody that I was dancing, it's partner dancing, was like, stop moving your hips like that. We're not dancing salsa. And then my family's from northern Mexico, from Sonora and Mexicali and like Baja California. We don't dance salsa, we dance cumbia, which is very similar, except that we don't hold hands. We're just like everybody kind of like on their own. It's not partner dancing. And when I first started doing salsa, like Colombian salsa in LA, I remember being like, oh, this is what my hips were trying to do. Like I didn't even... Because in some sense, it is the way that I saw my family dance as I was growing up, but maybe it's also the way that my body moves at the end of the day. So there's always something really interesting. And I'm asking about these questions because you focus on Latinas, right? So when you're coaching them, like I'm also curious of like where in the Latinidad, where do you dive in or what are the concerns that they bring you? If there's anything that you want to share along that.
Yeah. So I think because being Mexican, Latina, and an immigrant, the biggest connection that I have with Latinas is my lived experience as a Latina. So if anything, Latinas gravitate to working with me because I understand their lived experience. They don't have to explain it. They don't have to feel ashamed of it. And one of the things that I do, whether it's intentional or not, is when they are processing some trauma or trying to reach a goal, and I have experience with that, I will bring it up to help them feel understood and heard, to help them feel like you're not alone. So that's one of the biggest things I feel that working with me really helps them, is to have another Latina who understands them and who is helping them to navigate what they're going through or what they're feeling or their goals. And in regards to trauma, I mean, we have similar traumas we've experienced, right? So, and I've worked through a lot of mine. And I know what it feels like to be in the side of like traumatized and then being on the other side. So when I work with them, that's really helpful for them because I'm able to help them understand, make sense of why they're feeling the way they're feeling, help them to navigate what's happening. And not only that, also helping them to build skills, new skills that they've never, ever built before. Like setting boundaries with their family or feeling confident in their jobs. Or I had a client who because we did specific work around her confidence, around trauma, she was able to ask for a raise at her job and she got it. Before that, she would have been really afraid of like, oh, no, I don't, that's too much. I should feel happy for what I have. You know what I mean? But because the work that we did, like we did the work to process the trauma that was connected to, she built the confidence to do it, and she did it, and she felt really good about it, and she felt really good. She even said, even if I don't get it, the fact that I'm practicing and doing this feels really good. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's our lived experience that often is what attracts our clients. I know it's what attracts me when I decide to work with a therapist, a coach, even a freaking accountant. Like, are they going to see me as a person? Are they going to just validate my experience or trust me with my experience? So someone, that's the beauty of like, there's all kinds of people that you can work with. And it's like, where do you feel the most seen, the most respected? Yeah. I know that for myself as a coach, it's like I'm always working for the highest version of my client, like the version of them that they want to be. That's the one that I'm working for, helping them make that bridge from where they are today to where they want to be. So we're both entrepreneurs, we're both coaches. And one of the things that I've heard often is that we should charge our worth, right? And what comes up for you when you hear that phrase?
Yeah, good question. So for me, what comes up is that is very disempowering because you can't put a number to your value as a person. And I don't think that that's necessarily empowering advice to be giving. I know that people use it to be like, yeah, I'm worth $1 million or 3 million or whatever. It's like, but like, you can't charge like $3 million for your work. I'm sorry. Right? I mean, unless you're like some really rich person. So I understand that it's coming from that place, but it is disempowering because the value that we have inherently as people, you can't put a number to that. So what I tell people instead, or my clients, or just, whoever's commenting that, don't charge what your worth is, charge what the worth of your work is. What results are you providing, right? That's what you want to charge. Focus on that. Don't attach your self-worth or your self-value to money. That is so disempowering. And money itself is about abundance, right? So money itself, the energy of money is about expanding and growing. And so when you're connecting your value to money, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, please don't do that. That's so disempowering. It's not. Yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, then that phrase for myself, I think about the clients that I want to serve. And for me, it's really important to serve clients across all income levels, from people who are just receiving unemployment to people who are working at a tech job and ready to take a sabbatical, right? Like, it's important for me how can I be accessible to all of them? And also, how can I charge a rate that feels sustainable for my lifestyle too, right? It's got to be a win-win. I think another part of being sensitive is that if the other person is losing and I'm winning, it doesn't feel like win-win. Mm-hmm. Especially as a coach, like I'm in such a deep connection with the person that the idea of like charging what I'm worth. I mean, first of all, like I'm going to echo what you said. That's impossible. Like, my worth is not tied to a number. Nobody's worth is tied to a number. Just because you have a lot of money in the bank does not make you a better person.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's how I feel about that. And, I have the same value as you in regards to wanting to make an impact, right? And I think that you also need to be able to take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't be there for other people. So that means that you need to charge, an amount that you can sustain yourself in. And also being able to, if you want to make an impact with people that can't afford your services, maybe having, for example, like maybe I can take in 3 or 4 clients a month that are kind of, that can do the lower range of whatever my services, like whatever that is. And then that way you're still helping them, right? Or offering programs to that community, or partnering with other organizations that help that community. And that is a way you're still giving to them, while also making sure that you are also have clients that can help sustain your work.
It's really important for us as entrepreneurs to know what our lifestyle costs are, what we need, and then to work from there of like, who do you want to serve and how do you make all of this work? It takes some experimentation, but I can share from personal experience that it does work, and it does feel good to just separate the idea that I could put a number on my time, on my worth, on my skills. No, this is just the exchange that we're going through.
Exactly. Love it.
Well, Monica, this has been a really delightful. Thank you so much for just sharing so openly about your own experiences. I love having you as a client. It was great to interview. As we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share, or how can people find you?
Yeah, so if anybody is interested in my work, I do offer a free coaching assessment where we can talk and explore if this work is right for you. You can just go to my website, monicaoduarte.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and also on Instagram. So Monica Duarte is my name out there. So those are ways that you can reach out.
Yes, and all of that, all the links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
It was such a pleasure having one of my own clients and a fellow Latina coach join us today. Monica's honesty, depth, and lived experience really brought this conversation to a place that felt both tender and transformative. I want to highlight that in this conversation, we talked about how some goals feel unsafe, not because we're unmotivated, but because there are deeper parts of us that still need tending, parts shaped by trauma, scarcity, or the silence around our stories. Monica reminds us that healing isn't about fixing ourselves to become worthy of more. It's about remembering that we've always been worthy. Whether you're navigating imposter syndrome, money wounds, or just trying to break cycles that have existed for generations, I hope this episode gave you a sense of permission to slow down and trust your own timing.
Thank you for joining me on Highly Sensitive Money. I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, and I hope this episode helped you see how money and sensitivity can work together while honoring our interconnected well-being. We have the power to create a system where everyone's needs are met because nature is abundant. If you found value in today's conversation, please take a moment to leave a review and share this episode with someone who could benefit. Your support helps this message reach more people navigating their own financial journeys. A thank you goes to Mike Schul for the music and Juan Antonio Nunez for producing. For more resources on bringing money and social justice together, sign up for my monthly newsletter over at allthecolors.net. I also invite you to schedule a free 30-minute call where we can talk about money coaching, investment management, and all things money and social justice. Until next time, remember that your sensitivity and deep thinking is your superpower.